So I wanted to start out with a story. Is that there's a young man, we'll call him John. And John's been dating his high school sweetheart for many years. And John's looking forward to getting married. And he finally gets a new job that actually pays pretty well. It's a stable job, so him and his sweetheart can get married. So they get married. They are now living together, and they're at their first weekend as a married couple. And so his wife wants to make a really special dinner. They're kind of their first big Sunday dinner together as a husband and wife. And she knows that John really likes ham. So she's going to cook a big ham dinner. So on Sunday afternoon, John stops by the kitchen to see how things are going. And he gets there just as his wife takes this big ham, puts it on a plate, takes a knife, cuts one big end off the ham, picks it up, throws it in the trash. Turns it around, cuts another big chunk off the ham, throws it in the trash, and then puts the ham in the oven. And John's like, I don't know anything about cooking, but that seems kind of odd to me. Why do you do that? She goes, well, my mom makes the absolute best ham of anyone I know. And my mom always does that before she puts the ham in the oven. He's like, well, do you mind if I call your mom and ask her what that is? I'm just kind of really curious what it is about doing that makes the ham so good. So he calls up his new mother-in-law, runs through the whole thing, and then kind of gets to the question. So why do you cut the ends off the ham before you put it in the oven? His mother-in-law is like, well, when I was a kid, my mom made the absolute best ham of anyone I ever knew. And she always did that before she put it in the oven. She's like, well, John's like, well, do you mind if I call your mom and ask her why she does that? And so he calls up grandmom-in-law now, goes through his whole thing, and grandmom just starts laughing. She's like, oh, when my kids were young, money was really tight for us. And I shopped around, and a lot of times you could buy a really big ham for less money than you could buy a small ham. But we lived in a tiny apartment that had this little miniature stove. So we had to buy the big ham and cut off the pieces that wouldn't fit so we could get it into the oven. Now, that's kind of a silly story, but it illustrates a really important point. That as we go through our lives, we build up behaviors, habits, mindsets that become increasingly part of our lives. And as our lives go on, we start to build more and more of these up. And sometimes we don't even know why we do them. We've just done them for so long, we continue to do them. And maybe we got them from our parents, maybe we developed them ourselves. And many of these habits may have been really useful at one point. But as time goes on, they get less useful. And sometimes they even get to be detrimental. Because if we start building up more and more of these habits, more and more of these things that we do just because we've always done them, and take responsibility for all kinds of things that we're not really responsible for anymore, over time, that starts to weigh us down. And what ends up happening in our lives is that our life becomes kind of like we're walking around with these big bags filled with bricks. That we're just toting a whole bunch of stuff along with us that we're not even quite sure why we still bring it with us anymore. But I've always done it, I've always had it, I can't put them down now. And what ends up happening is we get so focused on managing these bags of bricks that we're carrying around with us that becomes kind of the focus of our lives. It's just managing all these things that we've always had to manage all the time. And when we do that, we never take the time to lift our head up and look around and see the beauty of life. Instead, life is all about managing the bags. It's not about living life. It's not about seeing where we're going. It's not about seeing where we're supposed to be. It's not about understanding what we can do. We're weighed down constantly with trying to manage all the things that have just come along with us over all these years. So this week, as we wrap up our series, Life on Purpose, I want to talk about lightening the load. Because remember that our goal in this series is to try to live our lives on purpose, to live according to the purpose for which we were created. Because the thing we've been trying to focus on is that to recognize this truth, that if we will live our lives on purpose, and what we mean by that is that we live our lives with intentionality, that we actually decide what we're going to do in each day. Because remember that a life is really just a series of days. And so our life is composed of how we use our time in each day, the decisions we make in each day. And so what we want to do in each day is make distinct choices on how we're going to use our time, on what we're going to do. And we want to make distinct choices to try to live in connection with God's leading in our lives. Because if we will make intentional choices and be open to God's leading and try to follow that leading, then we start to live a life that fulfills our purpose. And if we live a life that actually fulfills our purpose, that's what fulfills us. Because we are all born with a purpose. I think we generally don't really know what it is. Some people are very fortunate to have a very clear picture of their purpose. Most of us are not. But as we go through life and as we follow the leading, we start to see our purpose if we're open to it. And I truly believe that each and every person here was born with a unique purpose. There is something that you can do that no one else will do it quite the way you would do it. And when we realize that, that's when we start to see that joy of life, that fulfillment in life. And what's really cool about that is I think part of our unique purpose is our mistakes. That it's the mistakes that we make over the years, the failings, we'll call them failings, but they're just part of life, things we just get wrong sometimes. But in that, we learn things. In our own struggles, we start to understand other people's struggles. And that starts to build up just a series of experiences that lets us do things in a way that are unique to us. And that's our purpose. And I truly believe that we are happiest in life when we are fulfilling our purpose. Even though it's often hard to know what our purpose is, and it's often hard to know where to go. So how do we know? I mean, what can we do to get a sense of our purpose? Well, if you remember back to the very first part of this series, we actually read something from the writer of Proverbs. Or the writer of Proverbs said, "For the Lord grants wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. Then you will understand what is right, just, and fair, and you will find the right way to go." So according to the writer of Proverbs, God wants to show us what to do, where to go. He wants to lead us in our purpose. So God wants to help us find our way, and God will help us find our way if we open ourselves up to that. Because remember that throughout this series, we've been talking about this idea of adopting a daily rhythm. The idea of there are certain things that we'll do each day that can help us get in touch with God's leading, but also can put us more in touch with our created nature, be more in touch with the way we're created to be. And these things all come together. And remember, what we said we would do is we would prioritize certain things in each day. None of these were very time-consuming, but things we wanted to be sure to give time to each and every day. We said we would prioritize a relationship with God, that we would take just 5 or 10 minutes each day to try to connect with God, to try to hear from God, to try to be aware of our connection to God. Then we said we would actually prioritize our personal wellness, that we would give ourselves at least 10 or 15 minutes a day to take care of ourselves, right? To take a walk, to get some quiet time, to journal, those sort of things. Let us process our thoughts. Look for what was good in the day. And then we said each day we would do something to develop our relational wellness, to be connected to other people in some way. And we talked about the tools we could use. I already mentioned journaling as kind of one tool that can help us out. We've talked about the YouVersion Bible app, a really easy way to get connected into the Bible and actually share that experience with other people. And my hope is that as we've gone through the weeks of this series, that you've had a chance to try to do these things, to try to incorporate these practices into your life. And my hope is that you've had the chance to do that, and you're actually starting to see what happens by doing that. That if we incorporate these practices, we start to see those little changes in our life. Because remember, we talked about, we're often tempted to think that life change comes in kind of these great big tectonic shifts in our life. But we learn that's not the case. We learn that the way we most connect is by actually doing little things consistently. And that's what starts to change our life. It's what starts to change us. Now, maybe you've been doing those things I suggested, and they're not really working for you. You're trying to take that time each day, and you're not feeling anything any different. That's okay. It all takes time. But the other thing that might be happening is that you just can't find the time to do those things. That if you take all those things I've mentioned, they add up to about 35 or 40 minutes a day. If you did the kind of the time frames I talk about, 10 minutes to connect with God, give 15 minutes to yourself, take 15 minutes to connect with other people each day. Maybe you're just finding it too hard to do that. And that kind of leads to a question. Are the things I'm suggesting throughout this series, are these things realistic? I mean, can we really expect these little things that I've mentioned to really change anything? Can we really expect them to do anything? Because let's face it, ministers don't know what you're talking about. It's kind of a joke. But the point is, I don't know any more than you do, right? And that the idea is that maybe these are just niceties I make up just to give myself something to say for half an hour on Sunday. And maybe I just hope that if I say things energetic enough, you'll believe me. But I don't think that's the case. I truly believe that these things can make a difference. I believe that because I've seen it in my own life. All these things I've suggested to you, I incorporate into my daily life, and I have seen the change that comes from it. But why is it so hard to see that kind of change? Because it took me years of adopting these practices before I could really connect with them and really incorporate them in my life in a meaningful way. Because there's something that makes doing this sort of thing hard. And it's this: responsibilities. Right? We've got all these little slices that I've talked about: relationship with God, personal wellness, relational wellness. But let's face it, man, our lives are filled with responsibilities. Right? Responsibilities just take up our life. If you're still working, or by the time you get ready for work, if you need to commute, you commute to work, you do your work, you get back home, and then you try to recover from work, that's kind of takes a lot of time. If you're raising kids or you interact with your grandkids a lot, that takes a lot of time. If you're working and you have kids, that takes all your time, sort of thing. And even if you're retired, the things you have to do, these things take up time. That's our responsibilities. And very quickly, our responsibilities can fill our time, leaving no time to do things like these daily practices that I've suggested. There's also another consideration. Maybe you're doing the practices. You're listening to the Bible app in your car while you're driving anyway. Right? You're doing that. But you're not really feeling the change. You're not really feeling anything's really happening. There's another issue of responsibilities beyond the time it takes. It's the space in our brain that they take. Our responsibilities tie up our thinking. And not that that's a bad thing, but sometimes they tie up our thinking in a way that's not good. Because we're worrying about things. We're wondering about things. We're regretting things that have already happened. And that starts to take up all the space in our mind. So even if we are following the daily practices, we're not gaining the benefits of them because we don't really have time to process what we're thinking, what we're doing, what we're seeing. So what do we do? Is there anything we can do? Well, I think there's a bit of a hint on what we can do, and it actually comes from the story of a guy named Abraham. Now, Abraham comes from the Old Testament. It's one of the oldest narratives in the Bible. It goes back almost to the very beginning of Genesis. It actually starts around chapter 11, so way back in the beginning of Genesis. And Abraham actually is a story that we can actually learn a lot from. Now, when we first meet Abraham, he actually has a different name. He actually has the name Abram. He doesn't get the name Abraham until later in the story. But it's the same person, whether we're reading about Abram or Abraham. And when we meet Abraham, God has given him this directive, but he's also been given a bit of a promise that goes with that. Now, if we look at the narrative, it starts out, the Lord had said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. So Abraham is told to, hey, get ready to travel and take some things with you. Make sure you take your wife, right? Make sure you take all those people who work for you, take all your livestock, your possessions, all those sort of things. And he calls him to go to the place that I will show you. And I think this really shows us what life is like. Abraham doesn't know where he's going. He doesn't know what the destination is. He just knows he's on a trip. And that's life for us, that you may not know what your purpose is, but you have one, and you're always traveling towards it, even if you don't know where it is. So then it continues. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. And this one line, to me, this is the definition of purpose, that we are all called with that purpose. And what we're called to do is somehow, in some way, to be a blessing to other people, to do things that are a blessing to other people. And in being a blessing to other people, we begin to experience blessing in our own life. That's what Abraham is called to do here literally, and I believe that is what we are each called to do. So this is a directive that Abraham's been given. So what does he do? He starts out pretty good. He actually, grabs his wife, says, hey, we're going to travel. He gets all of his workers and said, prepare to travel. Takes his herds, takes everything. But then he takes one more thing with him. He brings his nephew, a guy named Lot. Now, Lot's kind of an interesting character. If you've ever read about Lot, Lot has a lot of turmoil in his life. Lot seems to get himself into a lot of stuff. I mean, that's why his name's Lot. A lot of problems. I don't know. But these are the jokes, people. Come on. They don't get any funnier than this. So, you're going to have to hang with me here. But now, what were Abraham's instructions? Right? Abraham's instructions were, right, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family. Yet, he's bringing Lot along. Why is he bringing Lot? Well, we don't actually know. But here's what we do know. Is Lot's father was Abraham's brother. And we know that Lot's father had died years earlier. So it seems likely that when Lot was young, Abraham helped take care of him. So Abraham felt responsibility for Lot. But at this point, Lot is a grown man with his own responsibilities. He has his own workers, his own herds. Lot isn't dependent on Abraham anymore. But it seems that somehow Abraham still feels responsibility for him. And I think that's why probably Abraham invites him to come with him, even though he was given clear instructions not to do that sort of thing. So now, as Abraham begins to travel, again, all he knows is he's supposed to go somewhere and that God would lead him there somehow. And he ends up making a journey of several hundred miles. And as far as we can tell, the journey's pretty uneventful. Nothing really seems to go on much. And then he arrives at a place called Canaan. And when he gets there, we're told, then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I will give this land to your descendants. In other words, this is it. This is that place I was leading you to. When I said I was going to lead you somewhere where you would become a blessing, this is that place. So what does Abram do? Abram continued traveling south by stages to another city, Negev. So he's arrived. You're right where you're supposed to be. But somehow, Abraham missed it. And he kept going. And I think that happens to all of us. That I think a lot of times we get to where we're supposed to be. We just don't see it yet. But the good news is that it's never too late. You can always get back there eventually. So what does this mean for Abram? Well, he continues traveling. And the thing is, as he continues to travel, he has his wife with him, his nephew, all of his possessions. But now his journey suddenly seems less directed. Where he'd made this very clear, easy journey initially, now he starts finding turmoil in his life. Now he starts running into trouble. He kind of wanders from location to location, starts running into famine at one point. He starts having encounters and difficulties with people in other countries. And things just seem to get more and more complicated. Now, to be clear, I don't believe that these complications were any kind of punishment for Abraham. I think it's just what happens. When we get out of where we're supposed to be, things just get more complicated. And Abraham did have good things happen. His herds did well, and good things happened along the way. But a trip that had been so smooth and easy had somehow gotten really complicated, to the point that even Abraham and his nephew Lot started to argue with one another. The two of them started having trouble. The people who worked for them start fighting with each other, physically fighting with each other. And then even their herds are now competing for the same food. It's just huge problems. So finally, Abram wakes up and says, you know what? Maybe it's not so good that we're together anymore. Maybe it'd be better if we split up. Lot, you go your way, and I'll go mine. So Lot heads off in one direction, Abram heads off in another. And as Abram heads off in another direction, where do you think he ends up? Back in Canaan. Right where he was supposed to be in the first place. Reminding us that we can get it wrong, so that's okay. We will get back there eventually if we stay open. And when he gets there, this is what we're told. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him. In other words, once he was free from that responsibility that he was never supposed to be taking on anyway. Remember, Lot was not supposed to travel with him. It doesn't mean that when Lot was young, it was wrong for Abraham to take care of him. But as they began this journey, it was time for Abraham to move on. But Abraham couldn't do that. He had brought Lot with him, carrying a responsibility, carrying a burden with him that was not his to carry anymore. But once he got free from that, this is what God says. And I love this line. Now raise your eyes and look from the place where you are, north, south, east, and west. For all the land which you see, I will give to you and to your descendants forever. Again, you're where you're supposed to be. This is your destination. There's still lots for you to do, but you're going to do it from this place. And this time, Abraham hears him. This time, Abraham understands. And what's different? He's free from the burden he was never supposed to be carrying in the first place. He can finally take his eyes off of what he's worried about all the time and lift his head up and look around and see the beauty of the land and see God's leading and begin to recognize that this is what he is called into this moment. But he couldn't see those things as long as he was dragging things along with him that were not supposed to be part of what he was doing in the first place. And once he realized that truth, now he could go on and start to fulfill the purpose that he was called to. So what about you and me? What responsibilities, what burdens are we carrying that we shouldn't be carrying anymore? What are the things that fill our minds? What are the worries that we're carrying all the time? And again, the key thing I want to point out, in that message, it never says that Abraham should have never been responsible for Lot. When Lot was young, it made tons of sense. But then the time came on for him to let Lot go live his own life. And we're not just talking about people. There could be all kinds of burdens and things we see as responsibilities for us that are not necessarily our responsibilities. But as long as our lives look like this, where we just have this massive block of responsibilities that crushes everything else that we try to do, we are going to have a very hard time living our purpose. Because these endless streams of responsibilities crush out things we try to do. When we try to do little things to try to connect ourselves with God, to be more connected with our human nature, to be more of who we're created to be, we get crushed out by those burdens, by those responsibilities. And why do we do that? Oftentimes, we're carrying these responsibilities that are slowing us down and they're hurting us, and we're taking responsibility for things that are not ours to hold. Why do we do that? Because many of us way overschedule ourselves. I spend all my life, it seems, overscheduled, but I used to be really bad. I'm a little better now. Right? Why do we do that? I mean, I think there's different things. I think sometimes we've just been doing things for so long, a certain way, it's just a habit. But I also think sometimes we carry excess responsibility out of fear. I think sometimes it can be something as simple as, well, I'm the only one who can do it right. If I let anyone else do it, they're not going to do it the way I want. Interesting, not that they won't do it right, they just won't do it the way I want. And we have to be open to that that's a possibility. The other thing that often happens to people, if you stay busy all the time and you start letting go of your responsibilities, we sometimes become afraid people won't need us anymore. If I let all those things go, they won't need me anymore. If I let all those things go, if I'm really, really busy, then I must be really important. If I actually have a balanced, healthy schedule, maybe I'm not quite as important. Again, I'm not saying any of those things are true. I'm saying that's how we feel. And it doesn't really matter what's true because we're motivated by what we feel. And it's important to get in touch with those ideas, those feelings, those friends, those ideas and those feelings and those things that hold us back. And it's funny, things that can be so bad for us can feel like friends. Right? Toxicity can feel like friends. Being overloaded can feel like friends because it's familiar. But it's the toxicity, it's that burden, it's that worrying, those things we carry with us that keep us from moving in a healthy direction in life. Because I think that if we would actually look at our lives, there's no doubt that responsibilities are pretty much always going to fill the overwhelming majority of our time. But they don't have to be this out of balance situation. That if we will actually look at what we do each day and why we do the things we do, we can transition to something more like this. Responsibilities are still the biggest part of your day, but they're in balance with the rest of your day. And then you start to find that time to do these other healthy practices. Because again, when we talk about prioritizing things, when something is a priority, it doesn't mean it takes the most time, but it does mean that you always make time for it. You find that 10 minutes, you find that 15 minutes. And that's what we mean by making something a priority. So what do we do? How do we move into that state? How do we actually make sure that we're kind of getting our responsibilities in balance and not being so overloaded all the time? Well, I think there's two questions we need to ask ourselves. The first one is, what are you carrying that you should put down? What is that responsibility? What is that thing that you're carrying in your life that, maybe it made sense at one point, maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but it doesn't make sense anymore. It's not something I need to have in my life anymore. What are the things that I can put down? And then the next question is, why is putting it down so hard? What's that challenge that makes it hard to put down? What's that fear you're experiencing that makes that responsibility hard to let go of? Because I think we need to understand those things. Because I really do believe that learning to lighten the load, learning to get free of our burdens, is a key part of having a healthy relationship with our responsibilities. I mean, I remember when I was young and I'd started my own business. I'm still young. I was just younger, by the way. When I had started my own business, my goal was to make enough money not to work anymore. Oh man, if one day I just don't have to work anymore, life will be good. You know what's what I learned is that as I made more money or if I had more time, nothing got any better. The goal wasn't to stop having, because I wanted no more responsibilities. If I have no responsibilities, life will be good. the reality is responsibilities can be really good things. I'm responsible here, and I'm happier than I've ever been. But it's being in touch with the responsibilities that you have, the responsibilities that are meant for you, as opposed to the responsibilities that are burdens, which means we have to develop a healthy relationship with our responsibilities. But that is a hard thing to do. It's a battle. It's a battle to get free of those things that are holding us back, to get free of those habits that we've always carried forward. And it's a battle in our mind that we have to take on to try to become more healthy. So now throughout this series, I've tried each week to kind of point to some resource we could use to kind of help us do what we talked about the particular week. So I have one more for you. This book. It's called Winning the War in Your Mind. I love this book. It's biblically based, and it's incredibly practical about what are the fears, what are the burdens in your mind that you're carrying, and how do you approach those, and how do you address those, and how do you get free of those. It's a relatively easy read. I can't recommend this book enough. I think it's a really good book for just getting in connection with who we are, why we have some of the challenges we do, and how we can get free. Because again, I believe that each and every one of us are called into a purpose, but we can only live out our purpose when we stop dragging along the burdens that are not ours to drag, and instead take on the responsibilities that are ours and let go of the ones that aren't ours, and trust that they will be handled just fine. Because the thing we all have to remember is that one day, whatever you're doing, no matter how important a part of it you are, someday someone else is going to do it. If it's your job, one day you're going to leave your job. If it's volunteering, one day you're going to leave your volunteering or you're going to die. And someone else will do it. And we have this tendency to believe that we're the only ones who can do certain things. Virtually never true. Somebody else is going to do it eventually. So consider your own health and your own wellness and trust God that the right person will step into it when that time comes. And if no one else steps into it, that's not your responsibility either. Right? We're not trying to forfeit our responsibilities. We just want to be in touch with the ones that we're supposed to carry. And in that, we can live out our purpose. And in that, we can have an impact on the lives around us that we're supposed to impact. So as we wrap up this series, just think through the things we've talked about and be ready. Be ready to make those changes. It will increase your life, it will empower your life, and it will transform your life and the lives of every person you interact with.